I've left these lamps on the ground for too long. I lost one. No, no. All right, what's going on though, everyone? How are you guys doing? Hopefully you guys are having a wonderful day. I may only be a combat level 80 noob account with 60 mil. I promise you guys on some of my alts, I've done quite a bit of flipping and merching in the past. And whenever I got into flipping and merching, I always just wish people would have told me what their biggest mistakes were so I could avoid it. I know what to look for. Experience is a huge factor. So let's get on into the video. Before getting into my biggest mistakes, a couple things to mention. The first one is that flipping and merching are distinctly different. Flipping is working on small current margins, while merching is more investing. If you didn't know that already, I have an entire flipping basics guide if you want to check that out. Before or after this video, feel free to. In addition to that, as I'm sharing my mistakes, if you guys have any notable mistakes that you'd like people to learn from, post those down below in the comments as well. I'll be hearting some of the best ones. And as well, if you enjoy the video at any time, make sure to leave a like. But make sure you like it. Make sure you enjoy the content before. So right now we are on GE Tracker for the first tip. GE Tracker is a website that I use for a lot of my Grand Exchange stuff, so we'll talk about them later in the video. But for now, I'm taking you guys through a tab of theirs where they sort everything in the Grand Exchange by recent flipped prices, and then they sort them in the highest margins. So we're looking at the best margins in game as of recently. This is what people often do. They come to this page, or they come to any page, any site that has margins listed. And even if you're doing this in game, if you find an item that has a good margin, that isn't all of the story. For example, here we have Dragon Plate Body Ornament Kits, which is a good current example. The current offer price that GE Tracker is telling me to put up is 23.4, and the sell price is 23.9. That's not bad. It's a 500k profit. That looks good to me. Now, that's where some people stop, and that's where I probably would have stopped up until I got a little bit more experienced into flipping, and there you have to look deeper. As we can see here, the buying and selling quantity per hour is 2, which looks pretty good. However, if you go to the graph, you can see that more on a weekly basis, we can see that it looks like, one may be bought every 3 hours. It really doesn't seem all that consistent that you're going to be able to sell and buy them all too often. So it's definitely an item that, looking deeper, I'd stay away from. And looking at the recent prices is also a great indicator. As we can see, it's been dipping a good bit as ornament kits do, so they usually continue, so I wouldn't say stay invested. So it's a bad flip in the sense that it could continue to go down on you. It's also bad when you consider that the recent prices have pretty much been like 23.8 for the most part the last week. However, they went up to 25 at one sell, and then have slowly come back down. So it looks like it's going to continue to go down, and it's hard to buy and sell them anyways. I'd stay away from it. Now, that's something I might not have noticed early on, but now I'm a little bit more used to. A couple items that will show further how this could be even worse is if items are getting high margins because they've recently hit a peak price. Here we have the gilded plate legs, where over the last month they went from 4 mil down to 3.4, but in the middle they hit 5 mil. Now, looking at the two lines, we can see what the difference between the sell and the buy price is, and rarely is it ever over 100k. I believe only 2 points in here is it over 100k. One of those being at the point where it was the highest price. Now, this is something that happens a lot when people are unsure of where an item's going to go. The margins are typically the highest because there's a lot of risk in owning that item. And as you can see, if you'd only owned it a week, you then start to hit that fall point. Now, where's that fall point? No one knows. It could be right here, it could be over here, but ultimately you're taking a big risk merching it up here because you're looking for an 80k profit for what could potentially, in a day's time, as we see right here, could be a 300 to 400k loss on those legs. So that's an example of a big loss you could take at any point up here, and why I would really recommend staying away from these, because you don't necessarily see the downside of it right away. So the next mistake to avoid is investing blindly or semi-blindly in items that are announced before an update. So RuneScape's a particularly odd game in the sense that everything is pulled. So whenever the game is going to change, the community knows that this is going to happen, and they typically know a lot of the details as to how this is going to happen. In addition to that, old school RuneScape's heavily linked to a lot of item sinks and gold sinks in the game, so having the knowledge that an item is going to be involved in a particular sink before it happens is information that is very useful. However, not as useful as you would think once given to every single person that plays the game, in my experience. Obviously, whenever a new item is going to be involved in a sink, almost everyone that can afford that item knows about it. They understand what's going on. And then the most logical connection that anyone can draw is that, well, this item that's in the game is soon going to be taken out of the game in some form, thus that item should go up. And to that, you would say, well, if I'm the only person that knows this information, that's very useful useful to know. If everyone knows that, the market's going to react somewhat instantly, and it typically does. So taking a look at a prime example of one of these updates is a Zamorak and Hasta. Now, as we can see here, obviously, it's not bad to invest necessarily. Sometimes it does work out. What I will say, though, is make sure you buy at the right times if you're going to get in on this stuff. Do not stay late, and that is the biggest thing, as we can obviously tell here. I mean, the Zamorak and Hasta is 11 mil. Looking at it, though, the initial reaction, the Zamorak and Hasta went from 8.8 mil all the way to 12.8 mil in about a week's time from when the update came out, as it came up late to the end of this week. So really changed about 3 to 4 mil in a week's time. Pretty significant. And then after that, like they normally do, they dropped a little bit. That's because people realize, you're going to have to be invested in 3 or 4 months. Some people just want to get on the initial hype, and really there's no more demand for those things 2 weeks in. Everyone's kind of bought up all they needed. Going forward, then it continued to kind of stay stable, and then absolutely just killed it going up. Never buy up here. It is just never worth it. If you don't get in at this dip right here, the initial dip after the surge, don't buy. There's just no point unless there's an absolute reason that you think that's the case. And we'll get into an example like that here in a second. Now, looking at it on a weekly scale, we can see it started to go down, and then within a few days, it absolutely just dipped. So, day of release, obviously, everything's just going to fall. And if you actually think that this item is going to be effective in the sync, and that's actually going to be taken out of the game pretty significantly, I'd recommend, if you try to get in late, buy after the update comes out, because as we see here and as we see every time, the item typically comes back to normal afterwards, and then you really start to feel the sync after that. Now, an item that right now is mostly just traded off of pure speculation and just off where people think it's going to go, that is Snapegrass. This is an item that was tied to the Nightmare Zone shop, which basically means people would buy whatever item gave them the most GP per point. So it's pretty much the currency at that point, and that's why it was locked in the 40 to 50 GP range for the entire year. At that point, Jagex then said that Snapegrass and Potato Cactuses were going to come off of the Nightmare Zone table, and since they've gone up, now recently they've been taken off that table, and we'll show the weekly scale, they've now started to go up. This is mostly off speculation, considering there's so much of this that's been traded lately. If we look, that there's probably a lot in the game to go for a decent while, but ultimately, I think that this is an item that, you understand once it's out of the game that it can't just be bought in mass quantities anymore. It has to physically come into the game. So it's an item that I would think over time definitely goes up, because it's hard to keep anything this low if people actually have to bring it into the game. So a factor like this, you could probably get in now. You could get in really at any time. If you think the item's actually going to go to the potential prices it could reach, it's still going to be worth it. So the next mistake to avoid also has to deal with new items, and that is because some of the most volatile times that you'll experience as a mercher or flipper is when new items come out. That's some of the most scary times. So one thing I will say is avoid flipping new items or investing in new items. This is an extremely important point. I know everyone falls for the eye candy when the new items come out. They see potential game-changing stuff that people are willing to pay high prices for, and they're like, well, this is going to be a time where I can get in on a flip, and that is correct to an extent. If you're good with this type of stuff, you definitely can find good flips, and you see them on day of release. You'll see some every now and then that are just absurd, but I tell you, those are extremely rare. It is much more often that people lose a lot of money on these items and don't post those flips. In addition to that, the first few days of release, people are willing to pay such an extreme amount for an item that isn't going to keep that value, that even if you can get in some good flips up there, if you get caught with that item as it starts to fall, like I have with the code I want in the past, losing like 100 mil, it really does just become something where you're like, it could go back up, and you sit on it, and it turns your day around real quickly. You can really start to fall off, and if you're losing 60 to 100 mil on an investment, like that's a lot of money that's going to be hard to get back through merching. Merching is just something that you kind of got to grind and really start to build up. And if you lose 60 to 100 mil in one sitting, you really can start getting some bad staking temptations. But obviously that's a mistake to avoid. How can we actually flip on day of release, you may be saying? Well, what I find to be some of the best things to do is that leading up until the day of release, it is really, really profitable to flip armor, really almost anything. A lot of the armor is going for all-time high prices, and they might fall a little bit here and there, but typically the margins are so great that you end up repaying any money you lose easily. And then on day of release, really pay attention to the metas that are coming out, what guides are saying, so you know what items are going to be used. Stick to items that are being used and flip those. Stay away from items that won't be used, because day of release, any item that really isn't being used in the new meta is going to plummet in price. And then that is ultimately how we can get back at this again. And in addition to that day of release, you can do a lot of monster drops. Whatever the new monsters in the game drop typically are high alch bound, because that's how RuneScape drop tables work, but there's a ton of supply, so they go back up quickly. And the last way to get in on this is by buying armor that isn't needed for the boss a couple days after the boss comes out, because it typically starts to dip as people don't need it for the new boss, and then in a week's time, 2 weeks time, when they're done with the new boss, they go back to all the other bossing, they need that armor back and they buy it back. So that's ultimately how I approach investing for new updates, and it's definitely seemed to work for me. So the next mistake that I see both people that don't know how to flip and people that flip make is exchanging or asking to exchange people's favorite or best flips. This is one that's never made sense to me. If you think about it from the perspective of people asking, it makes total sense. From the person answering, it makes no sense. So if you're asking me what my favorite flip is, it makes a ton of sense. You know, you need to know some flips. You don't really know what's going on the scene, and you want some good items. But from the person that's telling you, it makes no sense for me to tell you the item, because, well, either one, I don't know any items right now because I'm not merging, in which case, sorry, but I got nothing. Or two, I do have a really good item, and if I do, if I tell you that item, you're either going to, one, undercut me, or two, you'll put it in for the same price as I will, and then I'll get half the flips. So I can either cut my margins in half and help a buddy out, I guess, but I may as well just give you the coins at that point, or the other option that I'm just not even flipping at the time. So ultimately, what I'm trying to say is, for anyone that's new to flipping, I have an entire video on how to find flips, what flips you should do, because, you know, if you told people 100 different items to flip, then it's a good thing. You know, they can make use with 100 different items to flip, but if you ask me for a couple right now, that's not really easy. And if you ask me for like 10, it's going to be like, all right, that's kind of a lot to ask. So it's just really hard. But ultimately, if you're new, I'd recommend checking out that video and really just checking out and noting down as many items as possible, checking their margins. If they're good, try them out. And if they continue to be good, then keep note of it and use it in the future. Keep the list secret to yourself, and people you trust only use the margins whenever you're not using it. Sometimes I'll do that. You know, if I hit my GE limit on a flip, maybe I'll give it away to someone, you know, let them use it. I definitely do that in my CC from time to time, but like, it is just really hard to go out there and just give away merches to everyone. So, and then this is the final mistake that I personally understand why people make this mistake. You know, whenever I saw GE Tracker, made this too, and while I love GE Tracker and has a ton of tools that can actually help you, the prices on this website are not necessarily correct, and that's just that's something that they have to do, because no one knows every single price that every item is selling for in the Grand Exchange. The GE Tracker prices are just taken from OS Buddy prices that it is giving them, so it updates as constant as the OS Buddy prices update, and then it goes about sorting them in many different ways that allow you to get a ton of different knowledge of how you can utilize these items. Now, the thing to note is that these approximate offer prices, as we can see right here, this updated 12 minutes ago my time, and it seems as if most of these prices were updated about 12 minutes ago. So they update every so often, and really what you're getting is a snapshot of what a recent margin would be. This is the most recent sell price for this item. This is the most recent offer price for this item as of 12 minutes ago. Stuff may have changed in that 12 minutes. With items with less buying quantity per hour, like a Scythe of Vitor, this is a lot less likely to be the case, as there's not as many sold, so 12 minutes isn't that big of a deal. But as you start to get to stuff that's maybe a little bit higher in demand, like green d'hide bodies, for instance, this probably won't be exactly right, and I definitely recommend you just buy and sell one. So oftentimes what I see people do is take these item prices as just the exact price that it currently is on the Grand Exchange, not a recent price that it has been. Now, I know it may seem strange to not necessarily get the current margin, however, there's really no way anyone can provide that. And getting recent snapshots of margins that have been apparent in the GE is almost more helpful than getting the exact margin at any time. Because if you think about it, if they actually updated these every single second to the most recent margin that was always happening, everyone would know what price to put it for, and then the whole idea of merging would just be people undercutting on the best margins on the top page for the entire day. So that's the final mistake I would definitely recommend people avoid, is that there's a lot more to it. This is just the base picture. And honestly, it's probably for the better in regards to merging, because then it's a lot more knowledge-based and skill-based rather than just copy and pasting some numbers. So that is going to be it for this video. Hopefully you guys can come away with some mistakes to avoid in old school RuneScape, and hopefully I can save you guys a little bit of money. You know, you can thank me later. You already know what to comment about, and you already, I'm sure, have liked the video. So today I asked you to go over and follow my Twitter if you wouldn't mind. Recently hit 500 followers, and if I don't shout it out in a video, I could be lingering there for a good half year to come. So that's going to be it for me today. Hopefully you guys have a good one, and see you, Hick.